I call to order the special meeting of council for Tuesday, May 16, 2023. And to start in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, I want to honor and acknowledge the Canmore area known as Shooting Willows, Stony Dakota, and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Stony Dakota. Of course, the Stony Dakota comprise the Bears Paw First Nation, Chiniki First Nation, and Good Stony First Nation. Also within Treaty 7 are the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Blackfoot Confederacy comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. We acknowledge that this territory is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, play, and help us steward this land and who honor and celebrate this territory. Now turning to the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda circulated? I'll move approval of the agenda for May 16, 2023 special meeting of council as circulated. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And we'll move to our first item of business, H1, capital budget and plan amendments. Mr. Sarte, welcome to council.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to be here this morning to provide a briefing on capital budgets and plans in order to provide a high-level context for a number of upcoming briefing reports and requests for decision. I'll summarize the impacts that we've seen on capital projects that brings us here today, provide a bit of an overview of the projects we'll be looking at in detail in subsequent meetings, and talk about the timing of those briefings and requests for decisions. I'll end on a summary of how the financial impacts of different projects will be tied together as part of the budget process, and then have time at the end for Q&A. In fall of 2022, Council approved a 6-year capital plan for the period of 2023 through 2028. That plan was approved as part of the 2-year budgeting process with authorization for capital spending in 2023 and 2024 from the capital plan. The vast majority of capital spending is for projects that maintain our current assets, provide for growth, and address community safety and environmental requirements. We work to bring that plan together from a number of contributing strategic and planning documents, and by the time it comes before council, it's quite pared back and really focused largely on priorities of council and for functional operation of our infrastructure. And where we do have flexibility in the plan tends to be in the timing of the projects in the near term. And so that's how we work to balance against grant sources and needs and funding requirements. There are a number of capital plan cost impacts that are necessitating a review in mid-year of that capital plan, and to look at the scope and staging in the context of our current 2-year plan spend. We prepare budgets for the capital plan in advance, sometimes well in advance of the budgets, with the best information we have available at the time. Designs will be at various levels of design effort, and where it's progressed, we'll have our consultants produce cost estimates based on estimated quantities. We use historic costs from our most recent projects, and our larger, most recent projects are from several years ago. In other cases, we'll utilize placeholders. Those placeholders are based on condition assessments, for example, with the roadways. A consultant will look at the condition of the roadways, outline the extent of spend needed on an annual basis in order to maintain the roads to a certain level. We'll identify projects in the short term, and then continue to monitor the condition and have placeholders in the budget that we allocate to projects of more urgent need as the years roll Actual project costs get defined closer to construction. And so we have this situation where we've got lead times between preparing and approving budgets and when we actually eventually go out for tender. We've seen with COVID that there's been a number of significant impacts to the market, and those are long-lasting and continuing. We, as I said, tendered really at the onset of the pandemic in 2020, and so that pricing that we received in March of that year was in really uncertain times for our last large projects. And so when we're comparing our current pricing to what we saw in that time frame, we've seen some pretty dramatic price increases. And rather than, as things normalized post-pandemic, seeing a reversion to that trend line of price increases, they've actually continued to increase and increase in a way that's beyond baseline core inflation. The utility master plan has been updated, as will be discussed in today's afternoon meeting. And along with those updates have come recommendations to address changing regulatory requirements and to address the condition of infrastructure. There's new recommendations each time a 5-year plan comes out. Just as increasing costs can require staging projects later in the plan, we can also obtain grants that we apply for projects in the 6-year plan that allow us to move, or even require us to move projects forward based on the spending timeline. And we've received a grant for bus stops that allows for that. There are obligations that we have that we sometimes aren't aware of the timing of. It's really dictated by third parties. And so for CP rail crossings, we have an obligation for the costs of repair and maintenance of those. And while we try to get an indication from the rail authority as to when that work will be done, oftentimes we find that that's given to us on a really short time frame between when we find out that the work's going to happen and when it actually happens. The cumulative impact of these changes is to require a broader consideration of the capital plan by administration and a number of recommendations for council upcoming that I'll outline today. The report outlines those projects and that require adjustments to scope, schedule, and budget in order to address the impacts. And we've endeavored to do that without materially impacting reserves or corporate financing in that shorter and medium-term time frame. Council direction for these decisions is time-sensitive, and as a result, we're bringing these forward rather than in the fall. We're bringing them forward now, which gives us an opportunity to act on council direction in this construction year. Any changes to that are directed by council changes that are proposed by administration have been considered within the context of what's currently approved in the plan, our available reserves and grants, and that would be incorporated in a summary update of the capital plan, which I'll outline in a bit more detail shortly. This graphic outlines the meetings at which council can expect briefings and decision reports. At the May meetings, we will have briefings on the progress of engagement and design on Railway Avenue for the Railway Avenue Central project, as well as updates to the utility master plan. There will be a briefing for that later this afternoon. Administration will request approval to increase the budget of the Bow River West Pathway with no change to scope or schedule for that project, as well as a request to increase the budget for utilities and surface works for the next stage of work on Bow Valley Trail and into TP Town at the Hospital Place intersection. With that project, looking at an additional year of schedule. An increase of scope will be proposed for the 2023 bus stop improvement program, and this is using a new grant funding source to pull forward future year work that's in the 6-year plan. And that's in support of our accessibility and transit goals. And lastly, in May, a new project for replacement of the railway crossing near Elevation Place by CPR will be brought forward. In July, we'll propose for approval of the design for the central portion of Railway Avenue, along with consideration for revised staging that accounts for the way in which that scope has changed as the design is developed based on the UMP work, to allow us to work within funding sources for the existing 2-year budget and to give direction to that team as to how to move forward on that project. We're holding a placeholder for the summer in the event that we can secure additional funding sources for the Cougar Creek project completion stage. And in the event we can't get funding sources locked down for that, then that would be revisited as part of the fall budget process or as funding sources are secured at a later date. But for now, we're holding a placeholder for that. Lastly, the cumulative impacts that have been considered in these recommendations will be presented to Council through the planned fall budget amendment process. And what we anticipate that looking like is to include any and all budget approvals that happen between now and the fall budget process. We are proposing renewed consideration of how we factor market conditions going forward. Generally, we have some optimism or use historic baselines that are likely quite optimistic. We'll give renewed consideration to how we consider placeholders in the budget and when those get updated, at which point, so that we can more closely reflect actual costs. Just an increase in pricing in general is going to require a renewed look at the reserve contributions that are being made, how we collect offsite levies, the offsite levy model project costs, and so those can also be considered as part of the fall budget process. The information included in this briefing and all of those that will follow, as well as the recommendations in upcoming requests for decisions, were completed through technical contributions from finance and public works and engineering, with oversight and direction of the corporate strategic team, and members of each are available here today to and are pleased to take council's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Asarte. Looking to council to see if there are any questions. And if we could change the screen. Yes, thank you. So we can see Councilor Faubert. Okay. Very good. Okay. Looking to see if there are any questions on this. Or higher level update before we get to the amendments that will come to us over time. Let's go to Councilor Faubert first, and we'll do the mute thing.
All right, I hope you can hear me. Yep, okay, good nods. My question comes down to sort of the process that we have in place for kind of the budget approval and then going out at the same time as other municipalities. Like every municipality in Alberta kind of follows the same budgeting cycle. You know, you approve around the beginning of December and then you start looking at securing things. If we did things earlier in the fall, would that give us a lead time and any competitive advantage for securing labor and supplies earlier than perhaps other municipalities might be, given that, you know, like if we slightly adjust our budget cycle to approve things a little earlier, would we see an advantage? And I will mute myself now again.
Certainly the earlier projects are approved, and the earlier we tender, the more options there are. We'll have better information, first of all. If we progress designs earlier in the process, and if you tender earlier, we're really targeting either late in the year or early in the year for our tenders. And that gives people, we get first in line, generally speaking, and then it allows for planning to get in the ground in March ahead of groundwater, which we're finding is just essential. The current budget process allows for that, the two-year budget process that we've just re-embarked on after needing to adjust through COVID. And so we're playing a bit of catch-up right now, but the intent is as we move into a more regular two-year budgeting process that we'll be able to stage the design work earlier and earlier and plan for construction up to 2 years out, which is really helpful. So certainly the answer is yes, and I believe the process right now allows for that once we get into regular use of it.
Thank you. Looking at count to see if there are any other questions. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Sarday. Some of the asks in here are starting to get pretty significant. Nearly 50% increases in some of the requests. At what point do we delay projects or cancel them? Are we still getting good value for our investments on some of these? I guess it's kind of a bigger philosophical question. You know, inflation is coming down. The labor market is still hot. Corporate profits are very healthy right now. And if we looked at moving some of these projects a little further down the line, will we get better bang for our buck?
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Speaking to the value portion of the question, I think every time you look at the pricing versus the project at hand, you consider the value. We believe the projects as presented still represent tremendous value. They're the priority projects on the capital plan. They consist of improvements that are necessary for us to have a functioning transportation and utility network in the future. They will need to get done at some point. In terms of timing the market, certainly there are a lot of questions around that. And what we're proposing is to take portions of two significant projects and to defer those in order for us to even out resource use. We're not recommending to defer the whole program. What we find has happened is prices are sticky. And trying to time the market is difficult. And where we've attempted to do that, oftentimes the pricing actually comes in higher in future years. And so we're looking to do a little of both, defer some of the work, lock in some of the prices, and try to find that happy medium where we can resource on a consistent basis the priority projects over the 6-year plan.
Thank you, Mr. Sarday.
Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Andy, for presenting. So some of these projects here, such as the pathway and the DP Town CAP 7297, some of the shortfall we're hoping to make up that through MSI. And
so that is on the next agenda item. Did you want to save your question after we've received a presentation on it? Because it's not really part of this specific agenda.
Yeah, it was kind of that mix, like a broad. Let's just care about so with that MSI, like going to that, what was it prior earmarked for before then?
In line with Mayor Crosser's suggestion, what I'll do is I'll speak generally to how the funding sources were looked at, and then as we get to the individual project, we can speak to the moving parts. In general, we have a number of consistent funding sources, and we have to make assumptions about future allocations, future availability of the MSI, for example. We get some indications from the province of how that'll change, and finance does quite a good job of making some conservative assumptions about how that funding will come available. A lot of our grants can be used for projects of similar scope. So we have, in broad buckets, we have utility projects that are generally funded by utility reserves. We have streets and roads projects that are funded by formerly gas tax, and now it's the CCBF grant. MSI is quite flexible. It can be used for many things. And so where funding sources are proposed to be transitioned to meet current needs, it's generally from similar project types in the future, and those projects will then again be funded by those same funding sources when they get repositioned ahead in the capital plan.
Yeah, I was trying to understand the silo piece there. Okay, thank you.
Dr. Cottle?
If I could just add to that, and I'll look to Mr. Irwin to correct me if I'm wrong. We did budget conservatively for MSI in the 2023-2024 budget based on the indications we were getting from the province. And then they announced actually an increase based on what we were predicting. So we have a small pool of more MSI money than we originally anticipated. Which just philosophically to play with. So the news is a little bit better than what we had assumed when we budgeted.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Seeing none, let's move to item H2 and get into the recommendations in front of us today. Mr. Sarte.
Thank you again, Mayor and Council. I'm pleased to present a recommendation for budget and staging amendments in order that we can proceed with priority projects in the 2023 capital plan to address safety, accessibility, transportation management, and growth and rehabilitation of our utility assets. There are a number of recommendations in this report that are interrelated. We're recommending adjustments to the staging and budget of the projects listed here. And that's based on contractor availability, the market conditions we spoke to earlier, and each of the recommendations are part of that larger context of the capital plan. In my previous briefing, I touched on the priority of our project in terms of how projects are decided on for the capital plan. These are projects that are essential to the safe and efficient function of our streets and pathways, functioning of our drainage systems in the TP Town and Bow Valley Trail area, utilities required for growth along Bow Valley Trail, and to meet fire flows. When we stage work, we are looking at our available resourcing internally, industry resourcing, the requirements of that long-term plan to keep up with all of these demands that we have from growth and asset rehabilitation. We compare that to our available funding envelope, where our funding sources, what are our debt levels, and where are our reserves. The current project status for the projects at hand, Bow River West Pathway has been tendered, and that has been awarded. In order to maintain pricing, it's been awarded conditional on budget approvals. And I'd like to correct an error in the report in which that was referenced as being conditionally awarded to Bremner Engineering and Construction. It is in fact PCL for the Bow River Pathway. And for the Bow Valley Trail and TP Town street and drainage improvements, including the associated water and sewer line replacements, that is tendered as well per plan and conditionally awarded to Bremner Engineering Construction Limited. I've touched on market conditions in the previous presentation. There are regional factors in play here just across the Alberta market, and really I think well beyond that. Shortages in labor and higher costs are a reality. I think this is quite acute in the Alberta labor market, and in the local market, as was alluded to, we are seeing local conditions where we have a lot happening at the same time, and we have unique local challenges around housing costs and labor availability. In addition to that, and potentially contributing to our upfront higher sticker price and going to the value proposition of these projects, we've used a low bid approach in the past. So we package up a design, we put it out to market. In that, we have a number of requirements for safety and traffic accommodation, environment, project schedule, and then contractors bid on the basis of that package, and what we see is that for a number of line items, the dollar value attributed to them will be quite low, and then we'll see regular pricing for other line items. And then, of course, trying to enforce the requirements of the contract later is a challenge. If they've bid too low, then they're going to be prioritizing other work as opposed to ours, and generally the resourcing put into the project is minimized to try to turn a profit. We've since addressed that with significant changes to the procurement process that we've used on our recent bid processes. We're doing one of two things in recent bids. We're either evaluating, say, 50% on price and 50% on qualifications, plan, experience of the team, or we're going to straight compliance with bid requirements and having an outline of some pretty robust submissions that they need to provide and boxes they need to check as a company in order for their bid to even be accepted in the first place. And then subsequent to that compliance check, we open their pricing and have a look at the pricing. And what that's meant is that we've had fewer submissions. It's easy to throw in a low bid submission. It's a lot harder to sit down and actually think about how you're going to plan the work, provide a schedule, outline your project team, and meet all the requirements as a company with good project staff dedicated to the project, so forth. So we've seen fewer submissions, but the submissions that we have seen have all been quality submissions. And if they haven't been accepted. They've been deemed non-compliant. In these submissions, we're seeing project requirements appropriately addressed, and likely what we're seeing as part of that increase in project costs, part's inflation, but part of that increase is we're actually seeing the true costs of properly delivering the project to our requirements be reflected in that. And I don't think we've properly accounted for that in our budgeting previously. And so that will, that's contributing to the pricing piece, but we expect it's going to translate into well-executed work that's consistent with what we're asking for. For the Bow River West pathway, we received 3 submissions, 2 were deemed compliant. We had very comparable pricing among all submissions, which I think is also a good sign. PCL was a successful proponent. The funding need for that project is $1.4 million, above the currently approved project budget of $2.2 million. And the proposed funding sources are some additional ISIP grant that's available through the Transit Commission, a CCBF grant, which is the former gas tax grant, which is a regular allocation the municipality receives, and our MSI grant. Of note, the original placeholder for this CAP project was $1.5 million. And we increased that through transfer from projects which were underspent in previous years in order to get up to what was then the project estimate for construction based on a conceptual design. So as the project's developed and evolved, the budget's been revised. This would be a second revision to that budget. For the Bow Valley Trail and TP Town street and drainage improvements, water and sewer projects, they were tendered. We received 2 submissions, and 1 was compliant. As was noted in a previous CAL report, the compliant submission proposed a schedule that has the work taking place next year. And I think this is another important piece that we're seeing is that with the way that the tenders are being written and evaluated, contractors are required to be realistic about what they can actually deliver. And instead of being promised one thing and then something completely separate delivered because that's the resource they actually have available, we're seeing submissions that we're providing flexible timelines, and we're seeing submissions that have appropriately resourced plans. So that should translate into better on-time delivery of the work. $1.2 million is required for street and drainage improvements, and that's proposed to be a combination of offsite levy reserves, which are collected specifically for stormwater improvements in TP Town. And so this is the difference between current projected reserve levels for construction next year and the amount that was in the reserve for that piece of work when the project was originally budgeted, as well as MSI provincial grant and CCBF federal grant. For the utility work, $500,000 is required for the water line replacement portion of the scope, and that's proposed to be funded by the Water Utility Reserve. This map shows the, call it 5 scope areas of work, including Railway Avenue, that have a fairly large impact on the capital plan based on how that work is staged. And as the designs are developing, scopes developing, costs are being firmed up, and contractor availability is being looked at, we are revisiting what is shown here, which is the staging in the current 6-year plan. And I can flip back and forth between these slides during Q&A. And what's proposed is that a portion of the work on Bow Valley Trail be deferred. This work is important. The sewer line replacement for 2nd Ave is needed within 5 years from a capacity perspective based on the UMP updates. And so it's proposed that that comes back in the 2024 to 2028 capital plan presented in the fall. For Railway Avenue, it was proposed that the central portion, which included 10th Street, be constructed in 2024, and a future project for the north end there's a placeholder for 2026. And we're working to provide more details at the July Council approval of the design, but we're looking at a staging that reflects the amount of work that can actually be constructed in 2024. So right now, with the addition of, it's proposed to include a water line replacement based on the UMP update on Railway Avenue. And based on that scope being added, looking at a first portion of work to be constructed and completed in 2024 up to Main Street, which is the key priority area on Railway Ave. And then we can look at restaging the remainder. It may be that the north end actually continues to be the next priority and continues to be looked at for 2026 completion. And then for the pathway, with the work completed to date, the tender in place, it's proposed for that work to proceed as planned. Just reiterating the fall and future budgeting process and the intent to bring back all of the information presented here in a larger budget amendment. And again, the information in this request for decision has been prepared with input from all of the technical departments as well as direction from CST, and we are all here to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Asarte. So is it, whenever there's an increase to a project and it happens, and nobody likes that it happens, obviously the first question is why. And so what I see, and I just want to get your bearing on this, is that it seems to be given a number of projects. We're talking about systemic issues. Not talking about a single project, something was missed or some other condition arose, but systemic issues. Micro issues would include the timing of when we did our original projections, our approach to bidding, and then there's macro issues, inflation, labor force availability, resource scarcity, those sorts of things. Am I on the mark there that that's really what's driving this? Okay. And what I see happening here is that there's been a triaging of the various projects, and some have combined scope, combined projects, reduced scope, some have been delayed, and others are recommended to proceed as planned, but with a higher price. So that's where we're at. Okay. Looking to council to see if there are questions. Anything specific to the projects that we'll be looking at today? And I see none. Okay. Oh, Councillor Hillstead.
This is more common questions. Because again, within the report, like the fact that engineered fill is up 47%, asphalt 72%, concrete, walking path 90%, like right there, there's half of the increases just because that's what most of this stuff is. So when all those things have been going up over the last couple of years, I expected many of these things to come back with higher prices. And then the fact that we've changed the way we go with our bids, which I am fully behind, because I think that is a better way. I've never personally been a fan of low bid tenders, because being in construction, I've seen those kind of bids, and most of the time I've had people come back to me later and say, oh, should have went with this person instead, because the low bid guy ended up costing more than the people that the other person, because of whatever. Because again, with the companies that we've currently awarded tenders to, they know what they're doing. So I just wanted to state that I like the new direction we're going with the bid process, and I completely understand why the prices are where they are. So thank you for the report.
Thank you for that perspective, Councillor. Any questions? Any other questions? And just in case you're reaching for a button, Councillor Faubert, do you have a question at all? There is a raised hand there. Okay, so let's go to Councillor Faubert and we'll do the thing.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
I didn't necessarily have a question, but similar to Councillor Hillstead, I just had a couple observations in terms of the conversation around some of the challenges around municipal budgeting. And then there are two scenarios that I often see happening. One is we have an amount that we've kind of put in place for what something might cost, but it is not in any way, the confidence in that number might not be high, but we still need a number to budget with. And that number can oftentimes, due to circumstances outside our control, the bid comes in a lot higher outside of. And then the other thing that I see happening is that we set out budget amounts in our budget. The capital budget is what I'm talking about exclusively. And because these are public documents and everyone knows our number, we get bids for that number, right? It's not often that things come in under. And so I know that at the fall convention for Alberta municipalities, there is likely to be a resolution coming forward in relation to that specific issue, asking that municipalities and municipal councils can do the capital budget in a different way, where we don't, and I think that could potentially be helpful. On the other side, I was thinking about, the placeholder numbers, where we have a bit of an idea or a range in the future of what something might cost. And I was wondering if it would be possible, or if this is even a best practice out there, but we prioritize our budgets, right? So we have this priority classification in terms of, this is public safety, so it's priority number one versus nice to have. But what if we also estimated capital budget costs using a confidence scale, so that us as council and the community would look at those numbers and potentially be able to see this is not what anyone thinks this might cost versus this is a really refined estimate. And we have confidence in that this is the number that we're working with, so that when things do come back and budgets go up, it's not a mistake, right? It's more that we've set an expectation on our capital projects budgeting amounts that some we are not very sure of what it will cost, and some we are, and then the ones where we're not sure if they're more, it just doesn't seem like everything is more because we didn't plan properly. These are situations outside our control, and there will always be budget increases. But I know if we had more upfront knowledge, I think as a community and as council, we can look at those numbers and be like, all right, I know when this project goes out that we might be looking at increasing this budget, versus I'm really confident that what we have approved for this project is enough for it to move forward. So I don't know if that makes sense. And then now I realize I've talked too long, and I'm going to mute, but is that something that's even possible or conceptual or would help, or am I just trying to find solutions for something that just is the way it is?
Okay, thank you. Just one second. We're good now? Okay, thank you, Councillor Faubert. What's your start?
Thank you, Councillor Faubert. Right now, we are structured with our budgeting in a way that if there aren't any significant dislocations, we're generally plus or minus 10% within our target. We are not budgeting we're not budgeting 110 or 120% and then consistently coming under. We are threading this very fine needle where we're targeting a number, and the reasonable expectation is we're going to be slightly over, slightly under. then there's a tremendous amount of work on the project team to squeeze that project into a number that we've picked. And sometimes that's picked with good information, sometimes that's picked with information that's prior to design development or maybe earlier in the process. I think that works okay in most circumstances, but when you start to see some major changes in the market conditions or major changes in the way that we're procuring, that doesn't leave any room for administration to move and adjust without this type of mid-cycle kind of larger picture adjustment. And so I think the work in the fall that we've alluded to in the slide is really to give some thought along the lines of what you've described is how do we is there an opportunity to provide some flexibility in the budgeting process that would give a bit more margin for error, because right now we're just threading such a tight target.
Ms. Smithers, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Mr. Asarti gave an excellent answer in regard to the budgeting and the various factors in play when we try to kind of thread that needle and give as the best information that we know at the time with regard to budgeting. I want to flag it. An additional challenge in there is that much of the work that we do now and certainly going forward over the next 10 or 15 years is related to life cycle maintenance. So when we start to look at the condition of our assets, in particular the deep utilities on the valley floor, there was a question earlier about what projects could we push back. We increasingly get pretty limited in the projects that we can push back simply from a life cycle point of view. So that's another factor that comes into play with budgeting. It's we're cutting it close on the life cycle work that we do, and we really have to try to hone in on that budget number, because it's not like we can just say, well, we don't have enough the budgets are too high to proceed with all the projects, so we'll just not do two of them. The not doing two comes at a cost, and sometimes just isn't going to be achievable, which is partly why, going back to Andy's presentation, he showed how the puzzle pieces can kind of be readjusted. We can't do that indefinitely. So I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was happy to see a lot of this funding coming from grant money, even though I understand that it all comes from taxes that come from somewhere. I get nervous when we start adding debt, especially when interest rates are rising. And I was happy to see not any of it is coming from municipal taxes at this point. Am I correct to that one? Yes.
Excuse me. There's also on the projects put forward, there's no debt.
There was one debt piece. Was there not? Cancelled. Was it canceled? Thanks, Rick. And a couple are coming from reserves. But one of the pieces that would be helpful for me is to understand the financial stability of those reserves. To just say we're taking $500,000 out of this reserve, what does it mean to that reserve? And I'm wondering if anybody would like to comment on that.
So are you particularly asking then on our offsite levy reserve, the impact, and our water utility reserves?
Correct.
Those are the two impacted?
Yes.
Mr. Irwin, do you have that information at your fingertips?
In these projects in particular, is that what you're meaning? Like what the net changes were?
Yeah. How do these projects affect the reserves that we currently have? Are we still in sustainable, healthy?
We're virtually where we were before the budget process. Because of canceling the two projects. We're shifting between MSI, CCBF, asset rehab actually went to the better by $450,000. Water reserve was increased by $500,000. The net overall is $450,000 better to our overall stability by canceling the 2 projects and changing the 3 projects, including reducing debt by 340,000. So really overall, not much of a change of these changes.
So financially, reserves are actually have higher balances and less debt.
Yeah, pretty much even, but yes, but pretty close. And with MSI, Dr. Cottle was correct, around roughly $300,000 from our budget assumption last fall to what we're 99% sure 2024 MSI allocation would be. So.
Great. Dr. Cottle, did you have something you wanted to add?
Maybe Mr. Asarte first, and then me. Is that okay?
Okay, Mr. Asarte.
Just for the offsite levy reserve, those funds are funds specifically collected for the stormwater improvements in TT Town. And so that doesn't have an impact on the overall reserve other than to allocate out funds that had already or are expected to be fully collected by the time of project.
Thanks for that. And if I could just add, when we had the auditors here in April at the Finance Committee meeting, and we had a bit of a conversation about the really great audit reports that we have and all of our finances being in good order and having healthy reserves. And then there was that, and also the contextualizing of the long-term financial plan. So there's a sort of point in time for our reserves and our budget, which is what Mr. Irwin is speaking to. And at this point in time, it's kind of a wash, or maybe some of them are to the better. But the canceled projects will need to come back. And to Mr. Asarte's point, with the construction market and inflation the way it is, we don't yet know what that will look like. So there could be a downstream effect, but it's yet to be known. And then we also have been flagging for council that we have work to do on our long-term financial strategy, especially around things like reserves and asset management, to Ms. Smithers' point about aging infrastructure and the window of our ability to address that shrinking. So there's a point in time answer, which is what Mr. Irwin has given, and there's the longer term answer. And the longer term answer, there's still a lot of unknowns, but I acknowledgement that we have work to do there. So it's not really a simple, it's good, bad, neutral. It's a point in time. And we will know more on the point in time when we relook at the projects that are being canceled. And then when we look at the long-term financial strategy. So it's good for right now, and then what it means for the future kind of depends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Right. Looking to see if there's any other questions. Rogers.
Just to build on what Dr. Cottle said, and just to, I guess, remind what Mr. Asarte said in his presentation, contrary to what we would normally do in the 2-year budget cycle with the capital plan, typically that would be a very small update. Any projects that might have come up since the budget was prepared that we weren't aware of. We are this year planning a full revisit of that entire capital plan based on what's happened here. That includes bringing back those projects. We'll have more information around pricing and what the current market conditions are at that time, and then that will inform our reserve situation. Part of that process is also to always provide updates to the reserves. We'll be able to incorporate the utility master plan impacts. You'll hear about that a bit more this afternoon. And so we will have a fuller, I guess, more fulsome discussion that does include all of what we've been talking about this morning. But at a point in time, we're good, and what will happen in the future is still to be determined. But it does highlight the importance of building our reserves so that we are able to deal with these kinds of things when they come up.
I very much appreciate the which is obvious, the consideration of each of these projects. It doesn't sound like it was simply, well, we have to slap money to it, or we'll just cancel that. There was obviously a triaging and a process that's been undertaken. So thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Cottle.
I do just want to thank you for that, Mayor Krauser, because you're absolutely right. And I do really want to acknowledge Mr. Asarte and Mr. Como and their teams. They really took a different approach internally with trying to figure this out, bringing a group together for several conversations about recognizing that this is kind of a wicked problem, and every decision has impacts and unintended consequences on other things. So they really deserve a lot of credit for taking a different approach and bringing the high-level report that you had earlier. So anyway, just really appreciate the change and the thoughtfulness in looking at it in a coordinated way.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other questions, so thank you, Mr. Asarte. I'm sorry.
I'll need 45 seconds to get the motions on the screen.
Okay, I'm going to be asking, while you're doing that, I'm going to be asking a question of council. Are you putting them up as they are in the agenda as one big motion?
They could be. It's whatever they want to do.
Do you have us on?
I do.
She's switching it still. She just needs, sorry.
2 seconds.
She's still working.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see it. Can you check this?
Yeah, no problem.
She's got it.
She's got it. She just got it. Yeah, it doesn't. It sounds questionable. Really? Well, you don't sound great. What's wrong with you?
Long COVID.
Really? Wow, that's awful.
It sucks.
I'm sure. This is like, it irritates it.
Any sort of like fumes, change of cold, like temperature, air, humidity.
Okay, so these have been divided out into all separate motions? Yeah.
Before you go,
Yeah. Okay, yeah, because in the agenda package, it was listed as one big motion. I was going to ask council if anybody wanted it split out. As they are split out, I will proceed with separate motions for each of the projects. All right, then we'll proceed with each of these projects individually. So I will move the council approve an increase to the 2023. Okay, I'm just checking the wording that's in the agenda. It's a little bit different. So I'll have to read it from the screen. Okay. I'll move the council approve an increase to the 2023 budget for CAP 7235 over River Pass, West Pathway, Phase 1, from $2,200,000 to $3,600,000, funded by $171,000 from Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, federal grant, $424,000 from the Canada Community Building Fund, federal grant, and $805,000 from the Municipal Sustainability Initiative provincial grant. I'm in support of this motion. It's an important part of our transportation network, and as noted in the report, in order to take advantage of the work already done to date, it's a necessary increase. Granted, it's a large percentage, but I think that we spoke to the systemic issues at play and the increase of the materials in particular that is all that this project is those materials. Anybody else like to speak to the motion? Okay. So there's been a slight word change, which I'll accept as a friendly amendment. Just removing the year, because it's redundant. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wanted to note how I appreciate, and these questions of overages over the years have always been something that I've brought up, and Councillor Faubert brings forward a point that I've made before, is that you can have it transparent or you can have it cheap, but you can't have it both ways. And so we find ourselves in this position where we have projects. We put out a number, it's a Class D number, and we hope that our budgets come in and correct the majority of the items that have gone up in price are materials and labor. And we all know how that's been going in the last three years. So I know it is difficult for administration to bring these forward, not only at budget time when we're approving them, but then when the budget is actually in play and they're trying to procure the resources. So I appreciate the change in the procurement process. I understand that that's brought us a larger number over time, but I think it will bring us a more consistent product. So I will be approving all of these motions, or not approving. I will be voting in favor of all these motions, but I wanted to say that I understand the thinking behind it, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness. And I was just talking to a cribber a couple of days ago, and he is selling 90% of his entire business because he cannot keep up with the changes in labor and materials, and he's losing his shirt at every turn. And so if that's happening on a small scale, you can imagine how it's happening on a large scale. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I'm personally really struggling with this one. It's gone from 1 point some odd million to 2.2 to now 3.6. And I appreciate that the money is coming from external sources. I also think that governments in general shouldn't be spending money like this in boom times. Should wait till times where labor markets are softer and the economy is softer. I worry about value that we're getting on this particular project. This is an integral piece of our road network, and I appreciate what it will do for us. But I'm struggling with the price tag at this point in time. At this point in time, I won't support this motion.
Just a question of clarification. Do you know what the price is going to be in the future?
The price may be more. Dollar values and inflation will say that it will be more. But will we get better value for our money at that point in time? And that's a question I don't know, and most of us don't know.
My understanding, we'll also have lost money that we've already put into it. And we'll likely have to do it again, and we won't have use of it in the interim. So I question your fortune-telling abilities. Anybody else wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing that, call the question. All those in favor? Oh, Tanya, sorry. I actually, from this angle, I see the, can hardly see the hand, but thank you for catching that.
Okay. I'm viewing council chamber screen, so I got the fall and future budget slide from Andy's presentation, not the motions. But I just wanted to say that I'm going to speak at this point, and then for all the rest of the motions, I don't need to speak. This is my comment for the full slate of what we're going to be voting on right now. I want to say that I'm in favor of all the motions. I know that this was a difficult process, and anytime you have constrained resources and you have to sit down and prioritize what it is you can do and what it is you can't do, it's a worthwhile exercise in and of itself. But I think administration did a really good job, like the mayor used the word triage, but right, of prioritizing, using to guide that decision, like understandings of what we've already invested, the value for the time and money, the priorities of the community, asset management, and our utility master plan, all things that come into play when we formulate our capital plan for approval each budget cycle. It's hard. Governments need to do business, and we need to be building the infrastructure our community needs, whether or not it's boom or bust. And kind of towards my comments before, the fact that prices have gone up doesn't, like, for individually, I respect that, there's a trade-off. Is the value of the total amount presented worth the final product? But to say that just because, it's challenging too, because just because prices have gone up due to external factors beyond our control that everyone is dealing with, it's a challenge because, like the mayor pointed out, future prices will only be more, right? Like, I don't know of a future where prices are less. And so we have to make the decisions now, given the resources that we have, given the priorities that we've set, given the direction of all of our planning documents and the needs of our community in terms of infrastructure and asset management. And I think that these kind of mid-budget cycle changes that we're approving right now, as well as everything that Andy kind of went over that would happen for the rest of the year, is, I think, exactly what we need to be doing to adjust, adapt, and with the conditions that we are encountering. They are beyond our control. And the final point is, I'm really grateful, and I agree with, and I thank Ms. Rogers for pointing out that a full review of our capital plan is going to be undertaken, because there are things happening right now. There are different factors, and it's going to affect our ability to deliver on our capital planning into the future. And things are changing, not on a yearly basis, but almost on a monthly basis. So, I think in the past, there were times when, you didn't really see a lot of budget changes mid-year, but we are in a far more an economy, and I think a market and conditions that there is a lot of uncertainty, and we need to be able to adjust as we go. And I really appreciate the work and the attention to detail, and the fact that administration is not just tracking these things, but responding to them, bringing them to our attention, and going through these exercises to make sure that we can deliver the most important things that we need as a community, and we're also being fiscally responsible. So thank you.
Thank you. So just on a point before I go to Councillor Ma, so Councillor Fairbairn did point out that what is being streamed is not this. It would have to be part of the screen sharing, I think.
So what's being live streamed is what you see on there. With the workaround that we have, we can't share the same screen to Tanya, so she can see it on the live stream.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're doing the best we can.
That's all we can do.
All right. Councillor Ma.
No, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, no one likes seeing like the sticker price go up for sure. And I remember first time I saw it, I was like, wow, that's expensive. But having said that, these are market conditions, and there's also an opportunity cost in delaying stuff. And I think when I looked at our strategic plan, some of the stuff with our like integrated transportation plan, this pathway, for example, it's a critical piece, and I think it's good to see it kind of be implemented. And will it go down in the future? It's hard to say with the cost and inputs. I am really appreciative of the new procurement process that looks like the administration is dealing with, because sometimes, the cheapest ain't always a bargain. And we're seeing that we had some trouble with that in the past, and I think moving forward, this is a really smart, logical way, and I really appreciate the foresight for that. I'd rather see more realistic, higher price bids, but they're quality bids, and we have confidence in them. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Opposed? The motion is carried with Councillor Graham opposed. I'll now move that the council approve an increase to the budget for cap 7297, Bow Valley Trail and TP Town Street and drainage improvements from $2,700,000 to $3,900,000, funded by $290,000 off-site levy reserve, $575,000 MSI provincial grant, and $335,000 CCEF federal grant. Anybody wish to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council approve an increase to the budget for cap 7324 Bow Valley Trail water upgrade phase 2 from $1,750,000 to $2,250,000, funded by $500,000 from the water utility reserve. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Councillor Faubert, is that a legacy hand? Or okay, there we go. Thank you. See, now I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council approve a reduction in the scope of capital project 7323 Bow Valley Trail wastewater upgrade phase 2 to coincide with the extent of cap 7297. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? None, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council approve cancellation of 2024 approved capital projects, cap 7355 TP Town Second Avenue Rehabilitation Construction, and cap 7369 Bow Valley Trail wastewater upgrade phase 3, and bring the projects back into the future capital plan. Would anybody like to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I move that council direct administration to update the 2024 to 2028 capital plan to account for future project budget and staging approvals as part of the 2024 budget amendment process. Anybody like to speak to that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I will now move that we adjourn this special meeting of council. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you.